Qatar Airways is looking to offload its Airbus A380 sooner rather than later. With many aircraft on order, notably the 777X, can this upcoming long-haul jet help replace the world's largest passenger plane? Additionally, what has the airline's plan been for the A380? Why did it return and what's next? The mission to replace the A380 at Qatar Airways really began at the start of 2019. It has been a lengthy process since then. The Doha-based airline, its intention to retire the wide-body, as it was no longer seen as economically viable. A retirement at this point was likely to occur by the 10th anniversary of flying the series, which would be 2024. Akbar Al-Baker, the now departed head of the airline, spoke with aviation analyst and said he intended to remove the plane, ultimately transitioning to next-generation twin-engine aircraft as they would have a better long-term effect on the company. As part of the retirement plan, the carrier intended to use the 777X as a replacement aircraft. The 777X, initially slated to enter service, remember, in 2020, was poised to alleviate Qatar Airways' capacity difficulties thanks to the retirement of super jumbos. However, despite a seemingly clear-cut plan, Qatar Airways' path would be substantially skewed by several factors that were beyond its control. Despite signaling its intention to retire the A380 by 2024 and replace it with the 777X, the airline's plan quickly spiraled out of its own control. While Boeing targeted a 2020 EIS for the 777X, it became increasingly apparent that the manufacturer would be unable to meet this due to issues with the GE9X and other MAX-related concerns. And remember, this all culminated in really an internal crisis. Additionally, the arrival of the global pandemic in 2020 would force Qatar Airways to rethink its day-to-day operations. And as part of that review, Qatar Airways grounded the A380 earlier than expected. Additionally, the company went one step further from the grounding, saying that it had no intention of returning the plane to service, even if demand was to return itself. While demand did drop quite considerably, Qatar Airways actually, believe it or not, was one of the very few airlines still operating somewhat of a robust schedule. It really was focusing in on repatriation flights for various different countries, getting citizens that were stuck elsewhere home. And while capacity was nowhere near what it once was, it still was one of the few that continued to fly to a certain extent on international markets. In the early 2020s, it also became all the more complex, with legal battles over surface defects on the A350 soon occurring. As a result, Qatar Airways then grounded this wide-body unit and said it would not take on any more of the type. It then saw an A321neo order impacted. Remembering that all of this was taking place when the 777X was failing to progress in its own right on certification attempts, throwing the future fleet planning that maybe the Doha-based carrier believed would be bulletproof into disarray. For a prolonged period, really during the COVID-19 pandemic, Qatar Airways did also refer to the A380 as its biggest mistake. However, Qatar was forced to decide the fate of the aircraft as demand surged back. Despite it calling it the biggest mistake, it might have to cop it on the chin and bring the plane back. See, after deliberation, Qatar Airways did go on to return the wide-body service, albeit you could argue a little bit reluctantly. The decision came especially after persistent difficulties in acquiring next-generation twin-engined aircraft, such as the A350 or the 777X on time. The pandemic and subsequent conflict had decimated supply chains. Away from supply chains, Boeing still couldn't get the 777X certified, with delays now stretching 5 years. Qatar Airways did need the capacity, and reactivating a grounded aircraft type for the short term made the most sense. As the aircraft returned to service, the decision was met with applause from the travelling public. The A380 had long been a champion for an enjoyable flying experience, with travellers sharing their preferences across forums and many reviews. But now, what's next for the A380 and Qatar Airways? And will the initial planned 777X replacement of this aircraft finally at some point take shape? Well, according to Aviation Week and further commentary, the A380 will remain in the fleet across the short term. However, this is key. Depending on the company's situation, this could actually extend further. While past management disliked the wide-body and was very clear on this, it has still proved essential in the airline's ability to serve markets following the return of travel demand after the pandemic. The retirement of the A380 A380 also seem to be hinged on one critical business development, the delivery of the 777X, remembering that this has only continued to face setbacks over years. Boeing's 777X was initially slated to enter into service in 2020, and remember that 1 year prior, Qatar Airways outlined the A380 retirement plan, so it is absolutely not hard to see why all of this made sense. But now, with certification not looking likely until 2027, there is a lot of doubt. Even if approval can be granted, airline executives don't expect at times the 777X to be flying until 2028, following, remembering, not just the delivery process but also familiarization. For Qatar Airways, this would then see them come full circle to their 2019 plan, which intended to see them remove the A380 and add the 777X. Now, after a hiatus largely beyond their control, the plan is set to be put in motion once more 6 to 7 years later, following the industry's more turbulent period. What is one thing that Qatar Airways, however, will continue to do over the foreseeable future, at least until the 777X is delivered, is better understand what the industry will look like come 777X delivery. Will there still be a requirement for the A380, despite its negative comments surrounding the jet? All that remains to be seen, and is the multi-billion-dollar question. Keen to hear your take down below in the comments. Thanks a lot for your support here on the channel. It means a lot. Take care, do be safe. I'll see you in a couple of days back here on GlobeTrotting.